Another day, another story. The awareness of mental illness, including schizophrenia, varies widely among individuals. Schizophrenia often involves symptoms such as hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking, which can make it difficult for someone to recognize that their perceptions or beliefs are not aligned with reality. This lack of insight is referred to as anosognosia, and it is common in schizophrenia. Welcome to Tabo Eminent Channel. Many people with schizophrenia are not fully aware that their thoughts or experiences are abnormal, especially during acute episodes. However, some individuals with schizophrenia may have periods of insight where they recognize their symptoms as part of the illness, particularly if they are receiving treatment like therapy or medication. Imagine a young man named Alex who, in his early 20s, began noticing subtle changes in how he viewed the world. He started to feel as though people on the street were watching him, even talking about him behind his back. The television seemed to send him personal messages, and over time, these feelings grew stronger, making him isolate himself more and more. At first, Alex didn't think anything was wrong. He was convinced that these experiences were real, and when his friends and family tried to tell him otherwise, he grew defensive, feeling betrayed. He believed they were part of the conspiracy against him. During this period, Alex lacked insight. He didn't think he was crazy, but rather that the world around him had shifted in a deeply sinister way. This is a classic example of anosognosia, where a person doesn't recognize their own mental illness. Eventually, during a particularly distressing episode, Alex's family convinced him to see a psychiatrist. The doctor diagnosed him with schizophrenia and prescribed antipsychotic medication. After several months of treatment, Alex started to notice some differences. The voices quieted down, and the overwhelming paranoia began to fade. For the first time in years, Alex started to question whether the strange experiences he had were real or part of the illness. In this phase of his journey, Alex gained partial insight. He realized that his brain might have been playing tricks on him, but the insight was not always constant. On some days, he could reflect and recognize that the paranoia and hallucinations were symptoms of schizophrenia. On other days, particularly during times of stress or when he felt alone, the delusions would feel real again, and the insight would slip away. As Alex continued treatment, he learned more about his condition, attended therapy sessions, and joined a support group for people with schizophrenia. These helped him maintain awareness of his illness and recognize the signs of an impending episode. While Alex would never be completely free of the illness, he had reached a point where he could better distinguish between his symptoms and reality. Yet, even with this awareness, the nature of schizophrenia meant that his insight was always a delicate balance, prone to shifts depending on his mental state. Alex's story illustrates that many people with schizophrenia can develop insight into their condition over time, particularly with treatment and support. However, the degree of awareness can fluctuate, and it's a complex, ongoing process. For some, recognizing their mental illness might never fully happen, while others, like Alex, can learn to navigate it with a mixture of understanding and periods of confusion. Let's explore another story, Sarah's journey through schizophrenia and how her insight evolved over time. Sarah had always been a creative soul, known for her vivid imagination and love for painting. In her early 20s, however, she began to experience something beyond artistic inspiration: voices. At first, they were faint whispers, offering her advice on what colors to use in her paintings, or commenting on her day-to-day activities. But as months passed, the voices grew louder and more insistent, telling her frightening things, like how her neighbors were spying on her or how her family couldn't be trusted. For a long time, Sarah didn't think much of it. She assumed the voices were simply part of her mind, perhaps linked to her creative process. After all, artists often talk about being guided by muses, and she figured her experience was no different. However, her behavior started to change. She stopped trusting her family and friends, avoided social gatherings, and would sometimes disappear for days on end, wandering the streets, convinced she needed to escape from unseen enemies. Her parents noticed the changes and urged her to seek help, but Sarah resisted. She didn't believe she was ill. In her mind, she wasn't crazy, she was simply more aware of the hidden dangers in the world than others. She felt her family couldn't understand, and that made her pull away from them even more. At this stage, Sarah had no insight into her illness. She fully believed her experiences were real. After an especially severe episode where Sarah became convinced that a local shopkeeper was poisoning her food, she ended up in the hospital. The doctors diagnosed her with schizophrenia, but even then, she refused to believe it. The idea that she had a mental illness felt like an attack on her identity, like it was diminishing her unique perspective. She felt alienated and misunderstood. For weeks, Sarah struggled in denial. The medication dulled the voices, but they never went away completely. She continued to think that the doctors were trying to control her mind, and it took time for her to engage in therapy. It wasn't until a breakthrough conversation with her therapist that she began to reconsider. The therapist gently helped Sarah reflect on the patterns of her experiences. They talked about times when the voices had led her into dangerous situations, or when her mistrust had caused her to lose friendships. Slowly, Sarah started to piece together the idea that perhaps her mind wasn't always showing her the full truth. It wasn't easy. Gaining insight was a painful process for Sarah. She had to come to terms with the fact that the very things she had believed were real, voices, conspiracies, hidden dangers, might have been symptoms of her illness. Over the course of months, she began to recognize that the voices and paranoia were not part of some higher awareness but signs of schizophrenia. As Sarah's insight grew, so did her understanding of how to manage her symptoms. She still heard voices sometimes, but with the help of therapy and medication, she learned techniques to challenge them, asking herself whether what she was hearing made sense. The once paralyzing fear started to lessen, and Sarah found ways to ground herself in reality, such as reaching out to trusted loved ones or engaging in activities that distracted her from the hallucinations. Sarah's journey was not without setbacks. There were times when stress triggered her symptoms, and she would briefly lose insight, falling back into believing the voices were real. Unlike before, Sarah now recognized the importance of maintaining her treatment and staying connected to her support network. She found a new kind of creativity in learning to live with schizophrenia, not as an enemy but as a part of her life she could navigate with awareness and understanding. Her art changed, too. It became a way to express her experiences with mental illness, offering a window into her world that helped others understand her perspective. Sarah's story shows that gaining insight into schizophrenia is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. It can be painful and challenging, but with the right support, it's possible to find a way forward while maintaining a sense of self and creativity. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.